All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Blossoming Together podcast. Today we have a guest speaker. Her name is Jenny Menko. But before we get into her, we're going to go over the objectives real quick. So objective 1, by the end of the training, the participants will demonstrate proficiency in delivering clear, constructive feedback to technicians tailored to individual learning style and preferences.
And the second objective is by the end of the training, the supervisee or participant will be able to set realistic, achievable goals for technicians based on assessments of skill levels and areas for improvement, fostering transparency and alignment with therapy objectives.
All right, Jenny, welcome.
Thank you.
Are you nervous?
Of course, always.
No, but you don't have to be nervous. It's me.
Yeah, you're right. We know each other. We got this.
So, Jenny, how long have you been a BCBA?
I've been a BCBA for almost a year for the title, like when I passed the exam, but practicing since like September. So however many months that is.
That's a lot of months. I don't know how to do math like that, Kirsten.
Yeah.
We don't have our little handy-dandy electronic EMR system to help us there.
Data system.
But how long have you been in tech, though? How long have you been in the field?
In the field, I've been in the field officially, I would say, for 4 years. Like, honestly, like 2020, COVID, fun things there. That's when I, like, started in the field. But then I had a random, like, month and a half, 2 months, sometime, like, in college a couple years before that. So that was my introduction to the field.
Before.
Wasn't planning on staying in it, and then did a career change into the field after graduation.
Yeah, what kind of introduced you to it for that like month and a half? How did you find our field and what made you fall in love with it?
But what made you leave and then come back, actually? That's like the new...
So I was planning medical school.
Okay.
That was my plan. And then I had an internship that was like revealed to me that medical students are... One, their life is crazy. And then two...
Your life isn't crazy now?
Well, fair point. Doctors they do a lot of, they see patients and they check in on them and then they refer them. And I realized I wanted to be the one that they were referring to, not the one doing the referring.
Okay.
So that's why I decided to switch. And I found the field because I went to a career fair, not knowing what I wanted, walking around. And this one company, they were the only company at the entire career fair that indicated they worked with kids. So that's why I was like, oh, I know I want to work with kids. Let's check that out. And that was it.
Oh, that's cool. And you just fell in love from there.
Yeah, I mean, I was just kind of skeptical, honestly. At first, I was like, I don't know, this is a summer job. Let's move on.
Yeah.
But then I realized I was like, I'm really good at this, and naturally, it's what I do. And once I started to understand the concepts of ABA, I was like, oh, like I didn't know what I was doing those first few months.
I feel like that's so common. Like,
That's
I don't know if it
true.
was for you. Like when I first started in the field, it was the same. I was like, oh, this is just a summer job or like something I'm going to introduce.
I was like, this is just going to be something that gets me my hour. I needed hours for something. I forget what it was. Like some thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this is going to give me hours. And then like once I was there,
Yeah.
it was just like life changing.
I wanted to like work with kids, but I was like, I don't know what I want to do with it. This is a good intro job. And I was like, oh, wait,
And
this
that's
is
how I
actually
feel like
where
a
I
lot
wanna
of
be.
people fall into it.
Yeah. It's pretty common.
I mean, you're doing a great job because we've name dropped you on here like
Every other podcast
I know.
I'm honored, honestly.
Famous Jenny Menko.
You guys finally get to be a part of it.
Yes.
All right, so getting into it. So you've been a BCBA for a little bit now.
Yes.
I mean, you've talked about it. Me and Kirsten have talked about it too. Like, what are some of the barriers that you've faced?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's been a lot of barriers. One of them definitely was splitting supervision. One, figuring out what techs am I going to see when, and then also figuring out how to balance my time when I'm in supervision. So, like, when am I talking with the client and interacting with them in the tech, and when am I doing some of those indirect tasks or unrestricted tasks?
What do those look like?
Like the tasks themselves, writing my session note so that I'm not bombarded later on, looking at data analysis, checking in to make sure the techs are running the data or running the trials and collecting the data accurately, doing
That's
IOA
hard.
data.
Yeah.
So
But then also being actively involved in the supervision. You're like, wait.
And I struggle with that a lot.
Oh, same.
It's very, and I feel like I still haven't gotten like a good grasp on it.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
I still be like at home checking everyone's like data because like I didn't get a chance to.
I'll do it when I'm doing my
session.
notes.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I wanted to check in on this program.
Like Kirsten's
Yeah.
also doing her notes on Friday.
Friday night at like 9 o'clock with my glass of wine and cookies.
So we want to be like you. That's why we have you on.
Oh my gosh, no, I don't have it perfect. I honestly walk away from like every supervision. I'm like, I started so many things and didn't finish all of them. Like it's prioritizing to learning that. Like what am I going to prioritize in the moment and what's most important for my kid and my tech right now?
Okay. Cool.
Do you find that there are any other barriers, like during your supervisions, that you're running into? Like,
Yeah.
as you became a BCBA earlier.
So becoming a BCBA and like switching from being a tech at the same company, it was a little bit challenging with learning how to give feedback. Because a lot of the techs I knew more like personally.
Were your peers.
And, yeah, they were my peers. So we had a lot of different conversations that weren't that BCBA tech conversation. So I think figuring out how to gear that feedback and knowing like when to give it and when it's like, well, you know the kid more than I do right now because I'm just getting to this kid's case and you've been on them for a little bit of time.
Yeah.
Some other ones, I think that was probably the biggest thing ultimately was like the feedback and balancing my supervisions.
Yeah, like balancing the time within it. I think that, it's probably my biggest barrier still.
Yeah.
I agree. It's really, I mean, I told you guys I struggle with it a lot,
Yeah.
but I think I'm getting better. I think.
And
That's all we're
finding the
going
way.
for, right?
Yes,
Progress, goals. Yeah.
Progress
So I know we talked about like one of the hardest things for you is like splitting that time. Do you have any systems in place or what do you do to help yourself with that?
Yeah, so I know that I get distracted so easily. So I made documents that allow me to stay in like one spot as much as possible. Instead of having 3 documents open, I just have the EMR system that we use and then my session notes document. And that's where I collect my data and I'll do my data analysis in there where I keep track of targets that are getting done, things like that.
What does that look like?
Yeah.
Because I imagining like if I had to do that, I would just, I don't know what I'd put.
You and your
like-
sticky notes.
Yeah, me and my sticky notes, we would be everywhere. So like, how are you organizing that? Like, document?
So it's a running document. So I have everything saved and everything that is currently being worked on is at the top.
Okay.
So my template for the session notes is at the top in one section.
Why don't we pretend like we have a client? So like Johnny, like you're in Johnny's supervision and your technician's Kirsten.
Okay.
Yeah.
So so do you want me to explain my
Like what would you what would that note look like?
what would the note look like?
your
My
document.
document? Yeah. So on the left, it would have the template of like the questions that I need to answer to fill my session note out.
Okay.
And then in the middle would be the program goals for my kid. So that and it's summarized, right? Like what the goals are from the assessment and then any targets that have been mastered. And then on the right side of it are like any of the tech goals that I have. And that I haven't fully implemented yet, but that's my plan is to be put in some tech goals.
I have some questions about that, but before we do, I want to name our first code word for your guys' CEUs. So code word number 1 is feedback.
Okay. All right, back to your document. So you have the goals in there.
Yes.
What kind of goals are you putting in there?
For the text?
Yeah, for the text.
So some of them are goals where it's like I need to start seeing this more. It's based on expectations that I have for what I want the session to look like. So if I want like the technician to start recording more mans, then it's like I'll put in a goal for that. Or if I want them to just be generally like doing more incidental targets, like I'll put in that goal. And then that way I'll be able to see like, oh, remember, this is a goal. So look for opportunities in the session to point out, oh, you could incidentally run this program right now. Things like that.
Do you share that with them?
Eventually, I do want to. Again, I'm still in the process of implementing, so I haven't gotten there yet. But that's something where I also think, like, how do I share that in the midst of my supervision with the client? Because I also still want our attention on the client.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's the other thing. I'm like, can I have a meeting separate from
I was gonna,
from supervision with them?
Or I'm wondering if you can like even send them, like we use a Slack communication, but your like communication method, you can like send them a message.
Yeah.
Of, like, hey, these are the goals that I'm working on, like helping you progress with our learner.
Yeah. But then I feel like that's something you might like discuss with them before you even tell them your goal, right?
Yeah.
Like I want to work on a goal for all of us and then meet with them before.
Yeah.
Or talk to them in supervision, like, is there anything you wanted to work on? And then come up with the goal. So that doesn't feel like you're bombarding them either.
Yeah. It's not just about like me, but we're on a team together and we're going to grow together.
Can you share like 2 or 3 examples of like what these goals would look like?
Yeah. So one I definitely said was the like the incidental targets. That's one of the big ones for me. I'm a big fan of natural environment teaching, and I think people miss a lot of learning opportunities.
They don't realize.
They don't realize it. So that's one.
Especially when you're a new tech too. Because you don't realize, like, I mean, as a new tech, you think everything that's in like the program book or a written program is what you need to be taking data on.
Yeah, especially even when I came here as a BCBA, I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to like promote the technicians to find those opportunities without writing it out within the like EMR system as a specific goal, like with specific targets.
Yeah. I know one thing that I've done with that, like within the EMR system, is learning to make the EMR system fit to be like what I need it to be. Yeah, exactly. So that's one strategy that I've done is using like instead of prompts, right? Like using the prompts as targets. And so that way they can mark when they've recorded this target and I can see that.
It's making it easy for them too.
Yeah.
I've stolen this idea from Jenny for like 5 of my learners now because I was like, it's genius.
It's been working really well. A lot of the techs are getting it and they're starting to see those learning opportunities and things like that. So that's also the other thing, going back to like goals for technicians. Once I set a goal, like I try to come up with an action plan. And so one of like the action plans in that case could be like updating their programs to match a style of data collection that allows the tech to implement that.
Oh, I like that. And that's creative.
Thanks.
I was going to say with like data collection, do you ever find, like I feel like I found a little bit with some of my technicians, like if they are struggling with the EMR system, I even create them like paper data sheets. Like if that technician will want to use them, do you have to like vary it for like specific techs, or do you tend to use the same for each of your technicians?
A little bit of both. So right now, like since this is kind of a new system that I'm implementing with my kids, it's not one that any of our techs are used to. A lot of them are like, this is new. I don't get it. What do I need to do? So right now I'm doing a lot of teaching and kind of just trying to get them accustomed to it. But in the event that like they're like, oh, this isn't working for me, then I change it and I'll figure out like what is it that's not, like what's the barrier? How about I do this? And we kind of have a conversation back and forth like that.
Yeah.
I like that. And you're being flexible with them. I know a lot of BCBs going like, this is the way I want to do it. And if you don't do it the way I want, like you're not good.
Yeah. And it makes it hard for the tech because they do want to succeed most of the time, right?
I think everyone in this field like comes in wanting to do better.
Yeah.
So like remembering that as well. Like sometimes they just don't know. Like we have to teach them.
Yeah. Yeah. Another example of a goal, though, too, is adapt to using a high affect to meet the needs of the learner. So this is one that, like, the technician was thinking about, like, my normal state, right? Like, this is how I normally present myself and what my natural personality is. But, like, this kid really needs more energy and, like, enthusiasm and things like that, so that
or even vice versa.
Yeah, vice versa. Exactly. So being able to recognize like what does the kid need in the moment and in general, and being able to adapt. So that was one that technician actually said that they wanted to work on that. So that one I was like, okay, cool, and then we switched caseloads. We didn't get to work on it.
It's an ongoing progress, and I feel like as a company, like one thing we could do is like share the goals we had previously written
with the
to the next like BCB that takes on that person, so they can continue.
Great idea. I feel like a lot of the stuff with our techs, like burnout is huge, right? With techs and BCBAs, and sometimes I think that some of the burnout comes from just not feeling invested in. I think passing goals on along like that is a great idea to try and prevent burnout.
I think that's great. Do you have any other goals, or is that the only one's coming to mind right now?
Oh, one was identifying ways and opportunities to allow the client to self-regulate while simultaneously continuing to pair and appropriately challenge him. So that's like thinking about, again, in the moment and recognizing those like differences and different antecedents that would indicate, or behaviors that would indicate like, oh, I need to respond in this way with this strategy. Definitely following the behavior intervention plan still, but being able to be more aware of those indicators of when to switch.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's a really good one.
Yeah. Go ahead.
That's okay. I wanted to come back to your document that you're using. So we talked a little bit about the technician goals. Do you think that the document, I know you've recently started using it, so it's kind of a work in progress, but do you think it's helping you like divide your time in the moment of your supervisions, like to know like when you're going to be hands-on with the learner, when you're going to be modeling for the technician, and when you're going to be like working on your data collection?
Yeah, I think, I don't know if this is like a general thing, but I think that sometimes, like, especially with techs, like, we have a lot of, like, different styles of, like, modeling, right? So, like, sometimes I think that some of the burnout comes from just not feeling invested in. I think passing goals on along like that is a great idea to try and prevent burnout.
Yeah, I think
ultimately, like, I have to decide when I'm doing it. Like, the document doesn't necessarily, like, it's not an SD for me to like, oh, I'm going to do it now, right? But what it does allow me to do is it allows me to be saving my work regularly.
For your session note later, right?
Yeah. So, or even data analysis too. Like, it's all on one document. So if I'm hitting Control S, like, to save it on that one document, I know I didn't lose anything for any stuff that I've been doing.
I'm even thinking, like, when you're like you're coming up with the next target, you have them all in one place. Like, oh, look, like previously master targets are right there.
And like switching, like, okay, so we've done receptive identification. Now I want to do expressive identification. Like, oh, these are targets that they should know, like, have in their head. Like, can we work on saying them out loud versus finding them? Yeah.
And I know, like, it sounds like so easy, but like when you have to go through like your EMR system and look through like the targets, it takes forever.
Or honestly, like when you are going from supervision to supervision and you have, 6 to 8 kids, like remembering like, oh my gosh, which learner is working on this right now? Like you have it in your head, you think that you're going to remember, but when the day is going fast, you're going to forget.
No,
for sure.
That's when you're getting pulled in a million directions that day.
Man, yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think that was the other thing, like the EMR system, I always think, what is the slow step? Like, what is preventing me from moving on fast and like being the most efficient? A lot of times it's sitting there and waiting for the EMR system to load.
Right.
So like we're
documents. Watching me down that day, the day you're in supervision.
Of course, right? Yeah. It's like, well, now I can't look at anything, but having that written document outside of it definitely helps.
It's really helpful.
All right. So I know you love collaboration and you love sharing like these notes and things you've seen like in supervisions to like the other team members, like the SLP and the OT. How do you feel like you do that? Because I know you don't always have time to like meet them later.
Yeah. So something that I did was I was thinking about like, okay, how can I communicate with all of them at the same time and not have something else that people have to be looking at, right? So I realized that our group chat for our kids, like we already have channels in Slack, our messaging system. And so that's when I use this nice little thing that they have. I don't know what it's called.
Canvas,
yeah. But yeah, so I was using Canvas and it just allowed me to put in like, okay, these are my thoughts and like what we're working on and this is what I want my technicians to know. Yeah. And then I made a spot for speech and OT for them to be able to put in their own information so I could go back and look at that. So that way I don't have to Slack them and like ask them to respond to me every single time. Right. But I can look at what they already have put in.
I feel like it's helpful too in ensuring that the other team members, especially the clinicians, like their feedback and what they want done feels valued too. And I feel like it feels the same for me because we've started integrating what you did in there, like with all of our learners. And I feel like it makes me feel like, okay, now I have like all my behavior plan stuff right in one place so that like the other clinicians know what to do.
But then one of my favorite things that came about that was like OT was able to like share like their sensory profiles with like us. Like, so even like if someone's covering or someone doesn't know the kid, they can just pull it up and have all that information there.
In one place.
Yeah. And so now when like a technician that's covering our kid gets added to the channel, like I don't want to say there's no excuse for them not to know, but like at least they have the resource.
You get so much information.
Yeah.
You get a lot of information. Yeah. And more information is better than no information.
Yeah. Just having it readily there.
Nice.
Really like that.
That's great.
I want to provide our second code word before we kind of shift gears. Our second code word is going to be time management. So it's 2 words, time management. Okay, so we talked a little bit about like feedback being a barrier within some of your sessions. I want to know like how you best provide your feedback to your technicians. Like what's the methods that you've found to be beneficial?
Yeah. So I feel like everything's still trying to figure it out a little bit.
Yeah. We're always learning.
Right. Yeah. Again, progress always. But I think something that I've realized, honestly, with preparing for this podcast and thinking about this question too, like I am a person that's a direct communicator. So
but sometimes it comes off mean, right?
Sometimes
Jenny
it comes off.
We were talking about this last night.
Literally, like I was like, okay, direct versus indirect, like you also, there's direct, indirect, and passive, right? So I think like direct, one way to define it is like we're talking face to face. Another way to define it could be like I'm literally telling you exactly what I want or like what I'm thinking. Yeah, it's like very clear. There's no interpretation type, like
there's nothing left to the mind.
Yeah. And then there's indirect, which could just be like,
I feel like I've done this a few times where I'm like, oh, like something I'm doing right now is like I'm talking like this.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then I just leave it. Then hopefully I'm like trying to like see like
a
will they
model.
catch that cue?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that sometimes isn't always.
You're giving an example of something to try
Yeah.
versus telling them to try it, or
like,
like
oh,
telling
I would
them to do it.
like I would run it like this.
Yeah.
Like that's a good way to run it with those materials.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's another way that you could do indirect, which is like via like some messaging system, right? Or like written feedback afterwards so that they can go back and review it. And I realized that I do not do like the like, oh, sometimes I would try it like this. Like I don't do that.
Yeah, I'm like that. And I feel like I need to like, there's been so many times that I've been like, oh, now I can't, like that's not working. So now I hate like
change to that.
I have to be like very direct.
Yeah.
And Jenny and I were talking about this because she worked with one of my clients before she became a BCBA. And I'm a very like indirect, almost passive person with my feedback because I want to give the technician like a chance to like pick up on it. Whereas like Jenny's like, no, like I gave her passive feedback at one point and she's like, you could just tell me that I did it wrong. Like, literally,
But then I guess at the end it like depends on your tech.
Yeah,
you
it
know?
does.
And that's what we've been like talking about. Like we'll ask them what they like.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about like individualizing goals and stuff for our learners, but I feel like sometimes we forget to individualize like the feedback to the technician too.
Yeah. And I think that's been a challenge is like learning how to adapt my own communication style to meet the needs of my technicians. That's definitely been hard. Knowing that I'm a direct communicator though too, at the very least, like currently my goal, because thinking about myself, I think about myself in goals.
Yeah.
Currently my goal is to at least like find ways to do it and that aren't as abrasive, right?
Yeah.
Like so I can still tell them directly, but leaving it kind of open-ended. And like sometimes I look at their facial expressions and if I see that they look like a deer in headlights, I'm like, okay, are you okay with that? Like, what do you think?
Someday I'll be like, oh, so like, what are your, like, do you think you can do that? Or like, what are your thoughts? What do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then from there, like open that conversation up and have that communication. So that, I think that that's been a big thing with learning how to give some feedback.
Yeah.
I wanted to come back a little bit. You talked about the other indirect method of communication for technicians. I think that I've started implementing a lot recently this year because I found that a lot of my technicians, they were so receptive to feedback in the moment. Like even if I gave very direct feedback on like programming or just the learner's style of learning. But then I would come back for supervision a week later and they would be doing things a little bit differently. And I would ask them, I'm like, oh, do you remember we talked about last week? Like, let's try it this way. And they would genuinely have forgotten. So now, similar using like the Canvas, but like any way to communicate with your technicians, I write notes for my techs, like based on the feedback that I provided them, whether that be positive or negative, not necessarily negative, but just somewhere to grow or to do things differently, writing it directly to them. So they have it as an example and something to look back on. And I found that it's been, they're applying things more efficiently.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I think that makes me think too of, this has been a phrase that's been tossed around at work a lot lately. Like, okay, give yourself grace or like give them grace, right? And I think that that's something too, thinking about people's personalities and different habits that they've established. Like everybody comes into work with a different background of like what they've been doing outside of being at work. And now at work, they're asked to implement these new protocols that they may or may not understand like why we're doing it that way or like know the value of it, right? And so then giving them that time to learn it and practice it and implement it. And I've had a lot of texts recently, like they tell, like I've given them feedback in a direct way, right? So then they come back to me like the next time they're like, I'm working on it. I'm not there yet. Like I'm working on it. I'm not there yet. So at least it tells me they're aware of it and trying to like change.
That they heard you.
Yeah.
You know what else that tells me though about you is that you're a comfort space for them. Like they feel comfortable that they're not doing it perfectly and like
but they know they can come to you.
Yes, they know you're going to guide them like in the right direction.
Which is kind of great, right? Cause I feel like that's a good balance to me just constantly telling them exactly what I want to see frequently. So yeah.
And that's funny because sometimes you'll be like, I'm too like I feel like I'm too harsh or like I said it too rude. Like, I love you, Jenny.
And I think like kind of how this conversation came up, like when we started talking about this podcast episode, it was outside of like discussing the podcast, but we were talking because I really liked a lot of the things that you were implementing, whether that be like with your documentation organization or just the style with your technicians. And I think that it came a lot from you being a tech so recently and like you wanted to change things like how you did them because of that. How do you think you kind of began all of this?
Yeah. So honestly, a lot of what I do stems from my desire to teach other people how to become teachers, basically, right? Like ABA is behavior-based, right? And it is behavioral, but at the same time, we're also teaching. And so like having that mindset and that mentality of every opportunity in our life being a learning opportunity and just being able to see that these skills could be targeted in these different moments. I felt like I saw that a lot as a technician, but there were a lot of struggles. Like sometimes it was like, I know I'm teaching my techs all the time. There was a time when I was working with the one kid that you were at my BCBA for. I asked you, I was like, do you feel like I'm still providing good services to him? Because I feel like I wasn't hitting appropriate trial counts on some of the programs that were in there. And some of it was because I was following the kid's lead a lot more and like using opportunities that popped up with his in the moment motivation that then meant I was missing other trials.
And like the challenge with like that was like that learner had lower motivation. So it was hard to find like many trials.
And he also had like severe behaviors, right?
So
that also took priority.
And
over.
that's kind of where I, as the BCBA, had to provide that feedback of like, yes, we are here for goal acquisition, but this learner's priority right now is behavior reduction. So it's okay that we are prioritizing like pairing and ensuring that those behaviors are lower. But I think that was hard for you because you came from other learners where you were like doing like 20 trials a day or an hour for them.
And that's where I felt like too, like being able to mesh like the two together. Like ABA wants a lot of data and that like I always say like ABA is trying to make us soft science a hard science, right? So kind of making it like we see this observable data that you can't like question, right? So trying to merge the two of, okay, we are following the client's lead or the learner's lead, but then also like if you're working on something that's not necessarily specified in the program, like do I need to adapt the program to maybe be a little bit broader? And allow you to record that like, yep, I've worked on this target.
Well, you do a lot of like generalization, like generic targets, right?
Ultimately, that's what it is. That's a good way to say what I do it. It's like generic targets. And then a lot of times I'll put in like random ideas based on the rooms that the learner likes. So to kind of prompt my technicians to say, oh, this, like I could use this for this target. I see it.
Describe like
what generic means.
Or like, describe an example target or goal that would be within one of your sessions that would be generic for some of our people that aren't necessarily incidental or NET like we are.
So basically I would put in like generic tacting actions. And so that's the program name in the session. And then within it, I am asking them to tell me like, what target did you target, right? Or like what action did you target?
They have to write that in.
They don't have to write it in because that was a barrier.
That's it.
Yep. I don't like having to like pull out my device and comment and write that because that's again.
I mean,
like,
that takes a long time.
What's the slow step? It's literally it's the typing. So what I like is to then have a button that says some stuff that typically comes up based on the client's motivation. So if this client is frequently in the gym, I'm going to put swinging, I'm going to put jumping, I'm going to put throwing, right? Like we're on a swing, we're on the trampoline, we're playing with a ball. And then we'll just stick with the gym for the example. I'll put in other things for other rooms as well. But then that way, when they're in the gym and they're running that, like, okay, tack the action for throwing, they would hit plus or minus.
For that specific thing, right?
For that specific thing.
For that specific action, sorry.
Action. Yep, exactly. And so if, like, let's say it was throwing. So if the kid answered independently, it was throwing, they would hit a plus for that, and then they would do a check to indicate that trial was like a plus, an independent, right? And then let's say they moved on to jumping. So then the kid needed prompting or errored with tacting jumping. So then they would do a minus and an X. And so this is specifics to our EMR system.
And we had like a few barriers, but like you went and like found a way to do it.
But ultimately, like this specific one allowed me to see what target was being run and did they get it right or wrong. Whereas the other way that we have done it in this EMR system, it would allow you to like
just it was run yes or no.
Basically, it was like the only button that could allow it to be correct was independent. And all the other ones were errors. So,
and I think what we should like really take from this and like thinking something that I've taken a lot is like just because you have these set data collection systems, especially across companies, like don't forget that you don't lose your creativity.
Yeah.
Like I feel like as a student, BCBAs prioritize their supervisees becoming creative with programs. And then as you become a BCBA, you get a little overwhelmed or like stuck in the set way, and we kind of lose our creativity. So just remember to get creative with your goal tracking.
One thing I really liked about it is like we've talked about before, like using your client's interests within your programming. And like it sounds like you've been doing that, and you've been like showing technicians how to do that. Like if they love the gym, like there are a million things we could do in the gym.
So
a million
many
things. And like, and you're putting it out there for them, so it's a little bit easier for them to understand.
Yeah.
But hopefully over time they start seeing they can do that everywhere.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and that's another thing too, like even this week I had a technician, and she's honestly new to our company, and so she's kind of new to being a technician, but she saw that for a fine motor skill, I had like turning a key. So we're working on like twisting the wrist, and she saw that in the kitchen, the kid was working on that same skill with like turning the oven on. And so she was like, can I record a data point for turning the key, even though it was the oven? And I said, absolutely, because at that point we're looking at like, what is the skill we're targeting versus what are the materials we're using, you know?
That's great. Yeah. So I know, like we were just talking about like feedback. So we talk about sometimes we're like a little bit like passive or indirect, but like, do you feel like there's situations like if we have like a technician, they like love the indirect and they do well with it, but are there situations like you're like, I can't do that. Like I need to like stop this. I have to be direct right now.
Yeah, behaviors, right? Like if there's self-injurious behavior, or if the technician is in a spot where they're gonna get injured, like maybe bit or something like that, like I am immediately stepping in and telling them like, you need to move or you need to block that, right? Like that's not a moment where we can be like slow to speak, right? Because safety is
and you need to be direct.
one.
You need them to do exactly what you're saying at that moment.
Yep, and I need it to be reactive. Like it has to happen now.
Right. Rather than like waiting and be like, okay, I'm going to write about this later for us to go over. It's not the time.
No. Are there any other situations you might?
Yes. So I've also learned that I ask a lot of questions sometimes. So I'll tell if it's like the first time they're learning that skill, right? And so once I've told them that, and like we come back to it later on, it's another supervision later in the week, something like that, then I'll switch a little bit. It's still pretty direct, but I'll start asking them questions. So the technician might ask me the same question again, and I'll say, well, do you remember like what we had said last time? And then I'll go from there. If they don't, like that's okay, I'll say it again.
Yeah.
But I'm asking you to kind of stop and think and build that like thought process rather than always depending on me giving you the information.
And you're kind of building their independence there, right?
Yeah, I'm fading myself back. Right?
Yeah, I like
A
that.
little fade plan.
Yeah.
So when you're providing that feedback, is there a way that like, especially because you are so direct, is there a way that you're ensuring that they are like checking, I guess, are you checking in on it in the next supervision? Like how are you ensuring that it's clear for that specific technician?
Ooh. Honestly, so checking in, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, but it's a hit or miss depending on like, you know, all the things in the moment that are going on. But I haven't really been super intentional about making sure to check in, but I feel like that could be something. And I'm like, oh, on my like document, I'm like, oh, I could add this in, like checking on that, you know?
Don't
like,
add too much stuff for yourself either.
That's true too.
But sometimes we forget like things we've said. So I feel like
gosh, like having like it all noted in there is like a good.
Yeah, leave a paper trail for yourself so you can go back and be like,
oh, we did talk about that.
Well, sometimes like if I have the same technician on 2 kids, I'll mix up like
who did I tell it to?
And what scenario? Because what worked for one learner doesn't work for like the other learner. So remembering that as well.
Yeah. I think that's actually somewhere where I struggle is like ensuring like I am indirect and I have like my passive ways, but I also like have very specific ways that I like things done.
Yeah.
And like that's something I'm working on. I'm trying to be more flexible. But if I give like feedback to one technician like that works in the mornings with the learner, and then I'm like, but wait, how can I ensure that my afternoon technician, they don't receive feedback the same way? How am I going to make sure that they are both applying like my feedback effectively and accurately?
But then I feel like you could do what Jenny said and just like post about it and like the group.
The channel.
Yeah, the channel. Yeah. Or like that group like documentation that you have wherever you're at.
I think that's a good way to do it.
I mean, that might be good. So they can read it. Be like, did you get a chance to like see like that note I put in? Because I know some centers, they have like little notes that like technicians have to read before.
Yeah.
Something else that I've been doing like alongside that with like having double technicians, just to ensure feedback is being like applied, is if I do like a big chunk of supervision in the morning where I changed a lot, like made a lot of modifications. I'm finding that this week when I'm taking on new learners, is that I'll schedule even just like a 15 or 20 minute supervision with the afternoon tech just to be like, hey, these are the things that I've like modified for today's session. Like, can you apply these or implement this?
That's a really good idea.
been
Just do a
helping.
check-in.
Yeah, because like
base.
the other technician, they were like, I don't want to wait till Friday to have to like make these modifications
Yeah.
and then
Or know how to run the
the new
thing that you-
program. Yeah.
I like that.
So that's something I'm doing.
Oh. Well, I know we kind of jumped into this a little bit when we were talking about your little ongoing note for when you like split your time. We want to talk about like the importance of like our session notes. So like we have to like session notes are very important. Insurance is reading them.
Yes.
Like anyone may like if someone like say I was really sick, you might need to read like my session notes to see like what I've been doing.
Yep.
So it's important to note like the things that go into a session note.
Okay.
So client information, so their name, age, gender. A lot of people have like templates that are already made. Like we're lucky we have templates, but if
I
you
didn't
don't,
have one at my previous
so you have to
company.
write all this in
I
by
had to
yourself.
add it all in, yeah.
So having that, any session details like the date and like how long you were there,
Yeah.
and then also like any behavioral observations that like this is when you go into like the writing portion, right?
Yeah.
You have to have like the behavioral observations, things you've noticed throughout the day. So like any ABC data, what behaviors occurred, how many times they occurred.
What modification strategies, and we'll kind of get into another thing that's really important is the intervention implementation. So what strategies were used for those behaviors and for like the acquisition targets? Did you use DTT? Did you use NET?
Sometimes these are in like the templates too, if you're
Yeah.
lucky, but not all those. Yeah.
That's another thing. Sometimes I thought about this, like, do I want to write my session note chronologically of like this happened, then this happened, then this happened, or do I want to like group it of like I gave this feedback and we talked about this strategy and like like what do you guys do and prefer?
I do it in, and I kind of like brought this from my previous center. I do it in like big paragraph format, kind of like you're saying. The second way is just like, this is what we worked on. I provided this feedback. This was the data. Because we also need to have the data collection in there. And I think this is something that's often forgotten is like, okay, we ran tacting actions.
But what did they score?
Yeah, there were 3 trials observed. They independently responded to 2 out of 3 trials observed. And then I'll talk about like the feedback that I provided, and then I'll go on to like the next thing. So like, okay, and then we were in a different classroom.
I go chronological because that's like how I have my little notes. They're not as good as yours. Probably like if I started doing that, I could do it the other way. But I'll be like, well, we started off in the gym. And then I like think, I'm like, in the gym, we did XYZ. And then we ran XYZ. But something I actually like forget a lot is like the behavior data. Because like I had no place to jot it down, I feel like.
Yeah.
Like
You know?
it slips.
It slips. And then I'm like, sometimes I forget.
Yeah.
And then I think another thing forgotten, like with the data going along with that, is like the progress towards either those behavior reduction goals or the skill acquisition goals. Like in there, we should be noting like if client is progressing towards this goal, or client is kind of stuck on this target, scoring 0.
And that's where it's hard because like we're trying to split our time in supervision. Like you said, like we're trying to split our time in supervision, being direct. But like we also need to figure this stuff out. That's where I feel like it gets like hard.
Well, and I'm also doing my supervision notes on Friday night. Sometimes shouldn't be doing them, but sometimes for Tuesday, and I'm like, oh my gosh, wait, I forget. So I'll have to go back to the technician's data and like look at like what they ran during that time that I was there. And it's really hard to like make sure everything is there. So
but that's why like I like this idea of like having like I mean, I'm very like disorganized. Everyone knows this about me. But like I essentially am thinking of like you're thinking of it as like a organized like thing, but I'm thinking of it like a big brain dump.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, I just put everything that needs to be like if I know what needs to be there, I can just dump it all there.
Yeah. And like I feel like that's the nice thing about the document too is like you don't have to save it being the done completed progress because it's just a document that's for you to go back to, right? So it could just be in that moment like you said, like a brain dump of a bunch of bullet points of things that you need to make sure you hit on when you do formally go back and write it up.
Yeah.
So like so when you're looking at your like document, how are you turning it into a more formal like a more formal note?
More formal note. So a lot of times what I do, honestly, it's so simple, but it works for me. Like I honestly will just hit enter and like leave a couple spaces in between or a couple lines in between, and then I'll just start typing based on the information that I had just put below it and like had brain dumped on. Does that make sense? like what I'm saying a
I
little
think
bit?
that makes sense. So you're taking the brain dump,
Yep.
and you're essentially like you already kind of have your like paragraph started,
Yep.
and you're taking that brain dump and entering it into your like paragraph.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then I can like that's my like documentation, so I can kind of copy that and then paste it into the formal like documentation that gets saved in our EMR system.
Okay, so let me like say it out loud. So you might have, so like let me go back to the things I said you need to put in your note. So you'll have like behavioral observations. So you would probably have like your brain dump, and under it like a template you already have like some behavioral observations I saw today or BCBA saw today are, and leave some space. And then you'd go back to your brain dump and add it in there.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
Something super simple like that.
Okay, then I feel like it saves you time on Friday night too.
Yeah.
I know. See, this is why this topic came up for an
Yeah.
episode, because I was working with Jenny and she seemed much more organized than me. Like, I am organized, but I still like, I just forget things and I don't keep everything like where I should. So I really need to, I need to start implementing some of these things.
Thinking about that, that's something too, like staying organized, thinking to yourself, like, what are my barriers, like, personally?
Yes.
So, like, same thing, if I have to open a bunch of documents on my laptop, right, like, then I'm going to get distracted and I'm going to, like, lose something.
Yeah.
And I'm less likely to do what I needed to do, which is why I have that one document. But
Right.
also, if I have to physically get up and, like, go someplace to get, like, something to remind me of what I needed to do, like
You're over it.
Yeah, I'm over it. Like your sticky notes, I'd be like, oh, I know I have a sticky note, but
It's
it's
at my
like
desk.
so far away.
But I forgot it at work when I was at home.
Yeah.
I'm at home writing my note.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So like that would be like a barrier for me. So I started putting like to-do lists of things that I need to do on my Slack, because that's always on my phone. And if I don't have my phone on me, because sometimes I lose it,
Yeah.
it's on my laptop.
So I feel like if someone wasn't like here and they didn't have Slack, you could just email it to yourself.
Yeah, like
That
do
would be
something
easy.
digital, like virtual. That obviously you have to be aware, right? Like HIPAA compliance and make
Yeah.
sure that you're following HIPAA. But like that's like make it as easily accessible as possible.
Nice.
Yeah, like before I like learned about your like little data collection, I would just Slack myself. Like if I were in a supervision, I would just like take bullet notes in my Slack and then like send it to myself and then go back later. But then I'd have like 13 from the week, and I'm like, oh my gosh, my Slack is overloaded and I can't find what I'm looking for.
I have another question.
Okay,
Just
go ahead.
jumping on to the next
Go on
topic.
ahead.
Can you walk me through the process of like how you review and analyze like your behavior data while you're in session? 'Cause I feel like it's so easy when you're like on your own, you're upstairs or you're at home analyzing all the stuff, but you're trying to be efficient with your time and you're trying to provide feedback to the technician right there and then.
Yeah.
So how are you doing that?
So sometimes I'll start and I'll ask them like, okay, like what's going on this week? How are programs going? Like any that you need help with, like any that he's been doing really well with. So that kind of points me in the direction for like what this technician's been working on and what I want to review based on that.
Okay.
And then I go in, and I know a lot of people like to look at the data, like the graph data, which is great because then I can see it, but
Like
because
a linear way.
yeah, in a linear way, so I can see like generally speaking. But then because I'm doing general targets, like I
Yeah.
want that specific information as well. So I've really been utilizing the table function that our EMR system has. So I'll look at the table and I'll go through and
Like the
look at
specific
that.
percentages.
Yeah, I was confused by the two.
So like, okay, so like our graph will tell us for like all of tacting actions,
Yeah.
like how is
Okay.
he doing in general with
Okay,
tacting
the
actions.
big graph.
Yep.
For the whole goal, not just the specific target.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so the specific targets, that data is shown to me in the table. So I'll
Yeah.
look and I'll say like, I'll see, okay, they ran jumping 3 times that day and they were all like pluses, all 100%. But then like the next day it was, or I guess the previous day, right? It was like they ran it 2 times and one of them was minus. So I'm
Yeah.
like, really?
Sometimes you're looking deeper in than just the graph. Essentially, like the first glance.
Yep, exactly.
I kind of have a follow-up question with that, and it's a little off topic. But like when you're looking and you see that a trial has been only ran like
3
say you're
times.
looking at like 3 targets and each of those 3 targets only have 2 or 3 data points. What are you doing to like kind of ensure that there is able to be progress on those targets with the technicians, like going into your feedback?
Yeah. So this is one of those moments where I end up getting really flexible. So I'll ask them like, okay, why hasn't this been run? Like, what's the barrier? Like,
Yeah.
like what's going on? And sometimes their response is like, oh, there's just not a lot of opportunities because they're not super motivated by it. So I also have another button that says other for them to click on. And so if I see that they've been hitting other a lot, I'll ask like, what are you targeting on other?
Yeah.
And so then they'll tell me a specific target and I'll say, okay, like you have a lot of opportunities to practice that over like this, right? Like, so to practice car over ball. And they're like, yeah, they're so much more motivated for a car. I say, okay, like I'm gonna take ball out as a specific target and I'm gonna put car in as a specific target. So that way now I'm still increasing how many targets we're getting through, but it's specific to the learner's motivation and opportunities available.
Kind of with that for both of you, I guess, because you guys both grew up in an NET setting with your data, and I came from DTT where I'm like mass trials. I need like 10 to 20 trials for a target. What do you guys like expect in your sessions of like expected trial count for, like, say you're doing tacting actions or tacting items in general?
I feel like I've been taught, like, if you're like a half day session, like you have to hit at least 5.
Yeah.
And if you're not hitting 5 consistently, that's something you bring up to your BCBA.
Okay.
So like I tell my technicians, like, if you have any like trouble, come to me, and then we'll probably like brainstorm from there. I just like to have 5 so that like my percentage comes up a little better, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like 5 is an ideal one. And then like going from there, if they're not hitting it, like there's so many questions as to why, right? Like where they're
like sometimes the target, like it's hard thinking about the targets, and sometimes I'll put in targets that I didn't think about, like too much, you know. I'll be like, I need to come up with 10, and I put in like take shoes off and puts on shelf as like a 2-step.
And they only have 2 opportunities.
Yeah, like they're only
that.
taking their shoes off twice that session. Like, my bad, that was on me.
Yeah.
And that's something I might do, like a generic target then.
Right.
And I think that's something I need to become a little bit more flexible. I think I'm a little bit rigid with my data. Like, I'm kind of strict where I'll like put a minimum trial count.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. I actually I have like a love-hate relationship with that because when you put in the minimum one, at least for our EMR,
it doesn't even graph.
It doesn't get graphed at all. And so then I'm like,
depends on where you're at. Yeah.
I missed this.
Yeah. Like now it looks like the tech did absolutely nothing and you've gone months without practicing that skill at all, when really it's only been practiced like 2 times a day.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is different than not at all, right?
Yeah.
So
I mean, I would hope that Kirsten's checking her data a little more than
I check it pretty often. Don't worry. I'm seeing.
you're noticing when like the tech's not
but
running
you know, like
or it's not
it
getting
does
graphed.
like if you're stuck, like you don't have like a good system, and that's what you've had it set as, and you don't have time to check the data in session, and you don't have time to check the data after. Like you get,
if we're not maximizing our time and we're losing those opportunities, because we're not
it might be the one
Jenny.
thing that falls under like the cracks, because you're like, I saw them do it, I saw them run that target, so you're like, that's fine.
It's fine. And I think, and this is something that I've been doing, but I don't think it would work for Jenny. So it's to remember, like, go ahead and individualize your organization methods, because she doesn't like multiple documents, but I'm okay with having like I have 50 tabs open on my computer at all times. So I'll have my Excel document for that learner, and I have each of their domains noted with the goals that I'm working on. And then similar to how you do in your little session note, I have what is the current target, what targets have been mastered, and then I have a section for like my individual notes for that day. So that's kind of how I've been ensuring that I'm double checking each target or each goal, like when I'm doing my data analysis in the session.
This like might be a good time where you take like the IOA data
like
too.
using that.
You know, like I'm gonna take data with you, and that way, like I feel like when I do that, I'm better equipped and I can catch those like things that fall under the cracks a little easier, because I'm looking at like what they're looking at on their tablets. So I know every target that's supposed to be there. Then I'm taking the data, and then after, when I'm scoring it, I go back and I'm like, well, how many days has it been? Or like, how long has this been going on?
Yeah. I like that. So I almost feel like you have the information, but you organized it differently.
Yeah.
In your own document, you know?
Yeah.
Like I think that just kind of goes to show that like everybody has to think about, how do I think and how is it going to work best for me? Like,
how do you visualize? I feel like this is the hardest thing you learn in practicum too, is like, how do you want me to like report this data back to you? Because we did a lot of like, our supervisor had us do a lot of like data analysis.
Oh yeah, you guys did the same.
We had the same.
Supervisor.
We had the same practicum supervisor. So we did a lot. Yeah, and just like I think I got really used to like how he wanted it reported.
I was just going to say that. I think that is a barrier as a student, because as a student, you don't realize like what it's going to be like as a BCBA. It's just like a big growth opportunity when you become one. And like, so you take their methods with you, and then you're like, wait, this isn't working for me. A lot of things are falling between the cracks. And I think that's something that you've done really well, is identify like what methods you're going to use.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. Ultimately too, I like did a review based on my experience from as a transition from being a practicum student to being a BCBA.
Okay.
And I think I wish I had more time, or like I had been told like, this is what I do, but I need you to sit down and like come up with your own method before I had stepped into the role as a BCBA, because I felt like I was flying by the seat of my pants at first.
But it's like that confidence piece. I feel like you're a very confident person. I know you as a person, but like when you're having to give feedback to people that were your peers like a day ago.
Yeah.
I mean, like our switch was literally by a day. It's like one day I was like a day before I was teching, and the next day I was a full-time BCBA.
Yeah. Which that's hard too, like thinking about like, okay, when do I need to do my indirect time where I'm sitting on my laptop and doing data analysis?
And you had more time for that when you were a student.
I did. And then also like being with like the technician and the client in supervision, like I literally was just the tech, you know, like I'm used to being that one-on-one person. So now learning how to step back and actually let the technician like be the one-on-one.
Remembering that I feel like for me, what was really hard is like remembering they're the person that the client should be really like. It's cool if they're excited to see me.
Yeah,
I like that. That's great. That's like a plus, but I don't want to take away from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of going with that. I have another question with feedback. Did you find, especially like when you jumped into the role as BCBA coming from the technician, either of you, where like you found it that sometimes techs might have been resistant to your feedback, or like how you handled when techs might have been a little bit more resistant?
Yeah. Not in a bad way, but definitely like
it's hard.
It's hard because they've all, like I'm coming on new to this kid's case. They've had this kid for months now. They know them. So sometimes like my ideas would be pushed back on, and which is fine. So then I would ask
like a challenge, like challenge me.
Challenge accepted. Thank you. No, but asking like, okay, like let's take a step back then. Like what's your, I don't want to say what's your problem with that, but like what's the problem with what I suggested? Like what's the barrier?
What's holding you back? Or have you tried this before?
Yeah.
Is it something like simple as that?
Yeah. Or like, because sometimes they've done something similar, but like I don't know that because I'm new.
You just came, like you maybe had like a little bit of time to get to know this kid. I mean, you took on a lot of my kids. I did. You know, you took on, like I was pregnant, I was leaving. So like, and I got my delivery date got pushed up real fast. So like we were supposed to have like a month, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And then we ended up having
it was like a week and a half.
Like a week and a half
at most.
So I had to give you like everything I knew about this. Like how many kids? Like 6?
Yeah, it was 6
of my kids. I had to give you all the information. So some things like got left out. Yeah. Especially if there were things I tried when the kid just started.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And so like asking them to share that information when they gave me pushback, and then kind of saying like, okay, there's 2 different ways that I'll respond. I'll either, if I have an idea myself, I'll be like, oh, what about this? Like, let's adapt it this way. Like, can you implement that because we're overcoming this?
Yeah.
Right. And then other times I'm like, well, I don't know what to tell you after that information. So I'll ask them like, well, what do you think we should do? Because we know that what we're doing right now isn't working. So what are your ideas? And then I'll give them feedback off of that, or share barriers.
And sometimes I just like, can we just try? Like I can try it, and then if it doesn't work, that's fine.
Yeah.
Like being like, if it doesn't work, I can take responsibility for that.
And I think another thing to like kind of think about with the feedback in the moment too is like, sometimes like we are BCBAs and we have a lot of knowledge, but we're not always going to have the answers. So if it's not an urgent matter, like feeling confident and being like, you know what, we need to get creative with this. I need to think about it. Let me come back next supervision and like come with more ideas.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Honestly, too, when I've said something like that, sometimes technicians will come up to me and be like, okay, so I was thinking about this last night.
And that's the best. That's us too, because you'll be like on a drive home. Oh, I finally thought about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, this idea came. Yeah. Oh man, there was something else that I wanted to say about it.
About
feedback and like when you kind of get pushed back and like opening the conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, like let's brain jog. What were we just talking about?
Okay, so another thing though, like sometimes when I open up the conversation in those situations, like I've had technicians come up to me later and they'll say like, oh, I had this idea. Is it something that we can do?
Yeah.
And like taking those opportunities, and this might be why technicians are okay with me giving them direct feedback, because when they tell me things like that, I'll be like, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Let's try it.
So as much as I'm giving them direct feedback of like, we're going to do this differently, or let's do this, like things like that, like I'm also giving them that positive feedback as well of like, that was great. Let's keep doing that. I love that. Like, and taking their ideas and valuing them.
And I think that's something that sometimes as BCBAs we like forget to do, or like you guys are saying, like these techs a lot of times know the kids better than we do. But I think sometimes we as BCBAs, we get on a power trip and we're like, no, we know it. But like honoring your technicians and knowing like their value, they have like,
so
they know
much
these
value.
learners
Yeah.
so
And I think
much.
that's like a confidence thing too. You're like, well, I need to know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So that's why like my plan is what we're gonna do, not theirs.
yeah.
Some of it's like being humble, like being confident and humble at the same
the same
time.
time.
And that's hard.
It's so hard, right? It's easier to be confident and cocky, let's be honest.
I think remembering like admitting you're wrong doesn't like make
Yeah.
you a lesser BCBA.
Yeah, that was something like one of the kids that I took over from you, like he had come so far from when he had started, like even before you had him as a BCBA. And so I was really nervous taking him over because I'm like, what if he regresses? It's going to be my fault.
No.
But that was like very quickly, I kind of had to learn with like sometimes my ideas don't work as well because I told the tech to do something and immediately it made the behavior worse. And I was like, okay, stop. That wasn't good. We're going to do something different.
But that's like the best way to do it, Jenny.
Yeah.
Trial
Trial and error. Which this was what I was gonna say.
Okay.
Sometimes I have to ask the technician, and like I'll say like, okay, I know you've got this, but can you just like step out like for a second? I want to try a few things because sometimes you only know what you're truly experiencing and like feeling out, right? And so you kind of have to feel it for yourself and see how is the client responding.
Yeah. And I think that's like, I love covering technician sessions. Like if a tech's out and I'm like, oh, I'll cover that learner because it gives me that like time to trial and error and try new things with them.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, moving on a little. Can you kind of give us some examples of how you've like tailored your feedback to an individual like technician's learning style? Does that make sense?
Can you rephrase?
Oh, yes. So can you provide examples of strategies you have used to tailor your feedback to like a specific technician?
Yes. Okay. So the first thing that I did, and I actually took this from you as my unofficial mentor, I sent out a survey to my technicians. Okay, the challenging thing with this is getting them to actually complete the survey.
And I'd be like, I can see you didn't do it.
Yes, literally. Also, I'm like, it's going to help me help you. So just do it for me, right? But that's what I'll do. I'll send out a survey. And actually, this survey is a little bit, I don't blame them for not wanting to do it, honestly, because it's a little bit more extensive because I don't want to just know.
Make it easier, Jenny.
I know. I'm holding on for a little. Yeah. I want to know not only like how do you receive feedback best, but I also want to know like what are your goals, not just as a technician, but as a professional and like as a personal person. Yeah, right. And this is where like sometimes I feel like, yes, I do need to ask them what goals do you guys want to work on, but sometimes I've got some information already.
See, and I like to do this too because you can individualize your feedback to what they value.
Yeah.
And like to ensure that they are going to be receptive to it.
Like, do you want to grow up and be a BCBA? Do you want to grow up and be like an SLP? Or like, are you like happy? Like this is your, like this is
where
it.
you want to be.
Or like, do you want to do something, like, do you want to be an accountant?
Right, like something totally different. Like,
and like, but still, like knowing what's important to them.
Yeah.
Like you learn a lot about your like technicians this way. Like, say like you have someone that wants to be a lawyer, but not just a regular lawyer, like a family lawyer, right?
She wants to be a family lawyer.
So you know she values like people and like
the family
people,
component and like the individual person's component.
yeah.
And I can see that within her because I see her like talking about like, oh, so and so did this and this made her dad like so proud, you know?
Yeah, I think that's like super helpful too because then when you're giving feedback, like, right, an important part about feedback is not just telling people like what to do, but telling them the why behind it and kind of explaining and justifying like the importance and value of it. And I think knowing what they value personally, you can get them to buy into something if you like communicate what that goal is to them.
Yeah, I agree.
Nice.
I want to stop really quick and do our third code word. It is goals. GOALS. Goals.
Oh, it's a nice spelling.
Thanks. I'm literate.
Is there anything else you feel like you wanted to touch on?
I don't think so. I think we covered it all.
Yeah.
What about you, Kirsten? Anything?
I don't think so. I think you hit it all. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I
Thank
know.
you, guys.
Thank you for coming on, Jenny Menko. And that's a wrap. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you want your CEU credits, go to our website at blossomchildrencenter.com.
Talk to you later.
See you.